Very well said, Judge.
Thank you. Janae, you want to call a roll?
For the May 16th meeting for the Charter Review Commission, Judge Adrian,
Here.
Diane Downing,
Here.
the Honorable Susan Drucker. Here. Dennis Kennedy. Michael King. Here. Mayor Persiak.
Here.
Claire Rizzaco. Here. Victor Ruiz. Here. And Davita Russell. And Davita Russell.
Okay, I'm going to declare we have a quorum, and we're ready to start. The first order of business on today's agenda is to take up a proposal to modify the language of the charter to include information and provisions as it relates to the Inspector General position. Dennis? We will note that you are here. Okay. The Inspector General position, which exists but has not been included in the charter in the past. And I think that the proposal is to include language into the charter that would institutionalize that position. And speaking in favor of the proposal initially today would be Councilman Dale Miller. Councilman, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you and the commission. Do we have the PowerPoint ready to go?
We do have the PowerPoint, but we're having technical difficulties. I think everyone has a copy. We have some copies at the table if anyone needs a copy to go along.
Okay, so
Davita's present.
All right, David, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. We're just getting started. You haven't missed anything yet.
Okay, I'll put my phone on mute.
Thank you.
okay, so the proposal that I'm offering this afternoon is to add a new Article 15 to the county charter on Inspector General. And the text of the proposed amendment is provided as Appendix 1 of the full presentation. And this proposal has a long history, stretching 6 years. Although I'm presenting it this afternoon, I would say that it's not my amendment. This proposal actually contains the thread of the discussion that's been going on for about 6 years on this particular topic. It was discussed prior to the first Charter Review Commission. The first Charter Review Commission recommended a version. There was further discussion on council after the first Charter Review Commission, and the current version builds on all of this work, plus input from the Inspector General, Mark Griffin, the League of Women Voters, and Executive Armin Budish and his administration. Currently, there is no language in the county charter on Inspector General. This amendment would provide a foundation under the Inspector General language that is currently in the county code. The county code language is mostly consistent with the proposed amendment, but there are a few variances, and if the amendment were put on the ballot in this form and approved, there would then have to be an updating of the code section to make it consistent. The current county code language is provided as Appendix 2 in the full presentation. The basic reasons to include Inspector General language in the county charter, I have three. The first is to provide permanence and stability. If it's simply left to ordinance, the awareness and concern that we have about preventing corruption, it could fade over time, and at some future time, the council could decide to get rid of the Inspector General language in the county code, but if we have it in the charter, it would be much more difficult, and so it gives it permanence. It also raises the stature of the Inspector General to make it a charter agency. It makes a statement about our commitments to the highest ethical standards. And third, with proper amendment language, it will help ensure that the Inspector General has the power and authority to be effective. There is precedent for the Inspector General language in local charters. I was able to find 13 other counties and cities that have Inspector Generals. And of these 13, 5 had Inspector General language in their charters, 4 did not, and in 4 cases I was not able to access the source document.
Excuse me, Mr. Miller, these 5 counties, are any of them in Ohio?
They are not.
Okay, thank you.
The 5 are, the full language is provided in the appendix in the full document, so you have all of it.
Thank you.
4 of the 5 with Inspector General language provided considerable detail on powers and duties, while in one case it was a very short provision that had about 3 sentences and just basically established the Inspector General and left the detail to ordinance. The charter provisions from the other counties and cities are provided as Appendix 3 in the full presentation. Having discussed the general rationale for an Inspector General amendment, the remainder of this presentation is on the specific provisions. The proposed new Article 15 on Inspector General has 8 subsections of Section 15.01 on Agency of Inspector General. Subsection 1, Powers and Duties. This section establishes the agency of Inspector General and the Inspector General. It provides that the Executive and Council will appropriate a fair allocation for the agency's operations through the regular budget process. This is language that was recommended by our county executive. He wanted to make sure that it's done through the regular budget process, but the language expressing the fair allocation is designed to prevent the county from starving the agency of Inspector General through the budget process, but doing so without providing for a dedicated funding source. I am not aware of any local government with a charter provision creating a guaranteed dedicated funding source for Inspector General. Broward County in Florida has a permissive 0.25 fee on all contracts, and it also says that if the fee is not sufficient, that it can be supplemented with additional general fund revenue. So it provides that as an option, but doesn't require it. And as I see it, the problem with a dedicated funding source is that in any given year, it's probably going to be either too much or too little, and it's better to get it aligned through the budget process. County Council is also given authority by ordinance in this section to further delineate the powers and duties of the Inspector General consistent with the charter language. Subsection 2, Jurisdiction. The exact boundaries of charter county government's jurisdiction are still being worked out. Therefore, the jurisdiction language is made subject to the maximum extent permitted under the Constitution of the State of Ohio and this charter. Authority is extended to investigate possible ethical violations involving any employee, official, or appointee of the county and any person or entity doing business with the county. Subsection 3, Qualifications, requires 5 years' experience as an Inspector General, Certified Public Accountant, Auditor, Licensed Attorney, Law Enforcement Officer, or other investigative officer. This is one of the sections that differs from the current county code, which requires 10 years' experience. We received input that reducing the requirement to 5 years would help ensure a sufficient number of quality applicants when it creates more flexibility. Subsection 4, appointment and term. The Inspector General is to be appointed by the Executive to a 4-year term subject to council confirmation. The term of Inspector General is staggered to end in the middle of the county executive's term. This provision also differs from the county code, which has a 5-year term. The impact of a 5-year term is that it ends at different times in relation to the county executive's term. We thought it would be better if it consistently ended in the middle of the county executive's term, so you're not trying to appoint an Inspector General at the same time that a new county executive is coming in. The appointment and reappointment are subject to confirmation by council. Subsection 5, removal. Removal of the Inspector General during term may only be for cause. Removal requires affirmative vote of 8 or more members of council. The Inspector General must be given the opportunity to be heard prior to vote on removal. That was a suggestion we incorporated from the League of Women Voters. And these provisions are designed to make it as difficult as possible to remove the Inspector General for political reasons or to obstruct an investigation. Subsection 6, vacancy. The appointment process in the event of a vacancy mirrors the regular process. Appointment by the executive, subject to confirmation by council. When a vacancy occurs with less than 2 years remaining in the term, the executive is given the option to nominate a successor for both the unexpired term and one additional term. This provision was included to benefit candidate recruitment, as it might be difficult to get someone to accept the position with less than 2 years assured, particularly if they're giving up another position to do so. Subsection 7, access to county information. This section was added by the suggestion of Inspector General Mark Griffin to help ensure access to documents. It provides the Inspector General access to a broad range of county documents, provided that the requested documents are relevant to an inquiry or investigation conducted under the Inspector General's authority. The provision provides an exception for legal limitations such as attorney-client privilege and HIPAA. The legal exception provision is exemplary rather than exclusive, meaning that there may be other legal limitations on the availability of documents, and that's allowed for in the provision. Subsection 8, subpoena power. This section provides the Inspector General the authority to subpoena witnesses, administer oaths or affirmations, take testimony, and compel the production of documents relevant to an inquiry or investigation conducted under the Inspector General's authority. There is ample precedent for this provision. 3 of the 4 local government charters in other communities that have detailed language expressly provide for subpoena power. Also, in our county government, the county council, the internal auditor, and the Consumer Affairs Department already have subpoena power, either by charter or by ordinance. This provision is necessary for the strong and effective operation of the agency of Inspector General. Executive Armin Budish very recently reviewed this draft language and made 2 recommendations. First, he recommended that it be made clear that the appropriations for the agency of Inspector General be done through the regular budget process. The draft language that you have was modified to so state. He also recommended that investigations of the Inspector General, including any subpoenas, be exempt from being public records until the investigation is completed and the report is filed. Exemption of public records is a complex and frequently litigated area, and I would really desire not to see charter language be invalidated. Therefore, I'm recommending that this issue be considered through ordinance when the county code update is done. The first Charter Review Commission recommended an Inspector General amendment. The proposal included a lot of similar provisions to this one, plus considerable additional detail. The proposal failed to make the ballot because Council in 2013 believed that more time was needed to see how the Inspector General operated. They also believed the proposed amendment was too detailed for the charter. I agree that details from the first CRC recommendation, such as on Deputy Inspector General, contracting with other agencies, confidential files, furniture, equipment, and software, and limitations on the Inspector General can be dealt with by ordinance, and that the council should not be required to set up a fixed funding source which may or may not be workable. The first CRC proposal is provided as Appendix 4 in the full presentation. By way of summary, the amendment that's proposed here provides the essential framework for a strong and effective agency of Inspector General. The county's agency of Inspector General has operated successfully for over 7 years, and I believe the council is ready to place an Inspector General amendment on the ballot. In my opinion, there are no specific provisions in this proposed amendment that create serious controversy. The proposal is the result of much collaboration with interested parties. I believe that this specific proposal can make the ballot if recommended by your commission, and I commend it to you for your consideration.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the commission? Yes.
Under Subsection 8, the subpoena power, in the first bullet point, can the Inspector General, does he have the authority to do any of that, administer oaths, take testimony, compel the production of documents? Can he do that now?
There is no language in the ordinance for the Inspector General that provides for such authority. So I think you would probably need at least ordinance authority to do so. So I think that it's questionable whether this authority currently exists.
So what authority does he currently have today?
he has the authority to conduct investigations and request cooperation, and the cooperation is voluntary, and generally the Inspector General has received voluntary cooperation in doing his work, but I think it would be a good thing to provide the authority to give him the tools necessary if he runs into resistance in getting the necessary information.
Thank you.
Any other questions? As always, Councilman, thank you for your thoughtful consideration of these issues and the work that you've put in to bring this to the Commission's attention. We would definitely take the proposal under consideration.
Thank you very
Thank you. Janae, next.
Next, we have the League of Women Voters.
Yes. Linda Mayer, County Government Chair for the League of Women Voters in Greater Cleveland. We reached many of the same conclusions through different methods. And so perhaps it would be interesting, just this has been up on the website, so I think maybe people have already read it. But we were in the unique situation of being asked by the Transition Advisory Group in 2009 to conduct a study and make recommendations for the formation of a code of ethics for the county. So we weren't specifically looking at charter provisions, but the way we went about it was to pinpoint counties like something like Cuyahoga County across the country. And I've listed the counties here, every one of which is an interesting place to go if you're interested in charter counties with the same kind of core city demographic. But we didn't always read their charters. We always read their codes of ethics. So that is not as thorough as the research that Mr. Miller did. But interestingly, I think we reached the same conclusion. We saw, for example, in Duval County, which is Jacksonville, Florida, they had an ethics board, an chief ethics officer, with a person who had issues, and I don't know who was right or who was wrong with the county council, but the county council stripped the budget. So we regarded that as a huge Amber Alert. So that is why our proposal is a bit different than Mr. Miller's in the sense that we do believe that dedicated funding is necessary. And an appropriate way to get it, I think, is to have the example he gave is to attach a small fee to the contractors who are identified as okay to do business with this county. You know, you've done your training, your record is clear, so you're now a county contractor, and there's this fee which goes towards towards the Code of Ethics enforcement. It would seem to me a good place, but I don't think that such language should ever be in a charter. So in general, oh, yes,
Sorry,
the
can I
yes.
just interrupt you? I understand you to say that you do not believe that language concerning the dedicated funding should be in
The
the
dedicated funding language, yes, but specifics like what should be the dedicated, that's something that council should wrestle with and come up with the best solutions. It doesn't seem to me that a specific fee is the sort of thing that should be in charters. It's like what we just did last Tuesday was put pages and pages of language into the Ohio State Constitution in order to fix gerrymandering. But we worked hard for that amendment, but in general, this amendment should be spare, in our opinion. So, in fact, that's probably the main thrust of our testimony, if you've read through it already. We think that there are 9 points that really need to be mentioned, but they wouldn't have to be in such a long article, because the other articles are not that long, and it starts to bloat the charter. When you mandate something, it seems to us that it need not be in detail, because that should be the council's work. The ethics officer of Allegheny County told us that he suffered from the lack of subpoena power. He also said he suffered from the lack of he could investigate complaints, but that's all he could do. He could not initiate an investigation on his own. That's something possibly to think about, because I believe the proposed language says investigate complaints as being the only valid activity. But I do believe that an inspector general who's in the building and has his ears open, picks up things, and on his or her own should be able to snoop.
for using the technical term.
Yes, technical language, yes. Okay, so that's our point 9, where we say the power to investigate complaints or initiate investigations, including subpoena power. So that tidbit came from the Allegheny person. We especially loved, but it's not so relevant here, the mechanism by which they choose the chief ethics enforcement officer in Milwaukee County, which I think is the county that produced Scott Walker, who's currently the mayor or the governor of the state. But they have a commission that functions somewhat like the Cleveland School District, which has a board made up of civic leaders from different stakeholders, and they give a list to the mayor of people that they recommend for the position of CEO of that school district. And then the mayor can choose, but he has to choose from that list. It's a way of getting a very qualified list of possibilities. But so far, I think our system is working okay the way it is. But our language that we proposed here is general enough so that the council could do some brainstorming if it wanted to. Number 5, we propose independent appointment and confirmation process without saying exactly what that should be. in the spirit of making the charter language general and putting the onus on the council to do the legwork. I think those were all the points that are in there, assuming that folks have read the rest. We did not. We noted that Broward County at the time was the only county that had an inspector general. I'm not sure if chief ethics officer isn't the same thing, and maybe maybe it's just semantics. I couldn't say. But at that time, there was only one. Apparently, there are 4 or 5 others now, but it was possibly a movement that Dave Greenspan knew something about, because I think he got some of his original ideas for this from Broward County.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the commission? None? Very well. Thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. Miller?
May I add something?
Of course.
I would just like to make everybody aware that that earlier versions of our draft amendment said that the Inspector General shall have the power to investigate complaints. But we independently came to the same conclusion, that the Inspector General should be able to investigate complaints and also should be able to initiate investigations. So we changed the language to simply read that the Inspector General shall have the authority to investigate possible ethical violations, ... And it doesn't say whether that started as a result of a complaint or whether that started as a result of something that the Inspector General's office became aware of on its own.
Thank you. That's useful. Okay. I said that we're graced today to have the current Inspector General with us, and so I'm going to ask him if he'd be willing to kind of...
I would be happy to, but I also don't want to take the place of others who may want to speak. So Judge Adrian, I will follow in whatever sequence you would like. I don't want to displace others who may.
I think this would be a good place for you to do that.
Okay. Judge Adrian and commission members, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I want to first of all thank Councilman Miller for his just outstanding hard work, not just this year, but over the last 6 years to put this together. I also want to thank County Executive Budish for his efforts as well to put together a proposal that I think is very strong. One of the things that I've been very graced with is strong support from the county executive and from county council, that although they may have their differences, county council and the county executive are together in wanting to root out any sort of corruption and to get the truth to make our county work more efficiently. As part of my job, one of the things that I find every day is that 99% of our county employees are outstanding. They work hard, they try to do the right thing, but my job, of course, is in part to find the 1%. And it's to protect the county and the taxpayers and the 99% of employees from those who may not follow the rules. And so, although the support today really has been outstanding and I expect it to continue, when we think about a charter, we're not just writing for today, but we're writing for years down the road where the environment may not be as supportive as we currently have from the county executive and the county council. I greatly appreciate the language that has been put together and the hard work by Councilman Miller to put together a draft that I think is very strong. As I look at this, first of all, I think it is important to be in the charter for the reasons that Councilman Miller discussed. And with respect, as I go down the list of issues, with respect to Article 2 in terms of jurisdiction, I also interpret it as Councilman Miller has said that I have the power to investigate ethical violations, whether those are reactive or proactive. And my current charter, or the current ordinance, also provides that I investigate violations rather than just complaints. And so I've taken a fairly proactive view of that to initiate reviews of county operations, both good and bad. And so at different times, for example, we found improvements that could be made with respect to Department of Development loans, where there were significant issues and opportunities to make things better. But on the positive side, we also found where the Department of Public Works was consistently better than budget and better than estimate. So we initiate our own investigations, and I'm very pleased to see that Councilman Miller's draft continues to allow us to be proactive. In terms of qualifications, I think that those are all important and significant. In my mind, the most important parts of my job have to do with information and effectiveness. And so Articles 7 and 8, I believe, are the most important, because what I care about more than anything is to be able to do my job. I have a great job. I get to come in every day and just try to do the right thing. And to be able to do that, I need information. So with respect to Article 7, or Paragraph 7, access to county information, it's important to clarify this. And I say that because at every level, different inspectors general around the country have run into situations where those they investigate don't always want to give up the information. So, for example, the Obama administration, the Inspector General for the Department of Justice, regularly ran into issues where those within the Department of Justice essentially claimed that everything was attorney-client privilege. The Inspector General for the United States Peace Corps, I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer. I served in West Africa, so I care about Peace Corps. They also had issue investigating the rapes of women volunteers because everything was immediately claimed to be privilege. So at the end of the Obama administration, the Inspector General Empowerment Act of 2016 clarified that these entities had to cooperate with Inspector General investigations. So I look at Paragraph 7 as being similar and analogous to what had to be done at the federal level. I would also say that every time that I've gone to County Executive Budish and said, hey, I need information, he has always insisted that I be provided with that. So again, this is not an issue of what's happening today, but it's an issue of clarity and moving forward. With respect to subpoena power, I also think this is a critical piece, and I appreciate, again, Councilman Miller's draft. I was a private attorney for 20 years before joining the county in 2015, 3 years ago. And in that capacity, I had the right to sign a Rule 45 subpoena, where I could compel testimony, I could compel documents. And when I became the chief ethics officer and in charge of investigating waste, fraud, and abuse for the county, I was surprised to learn that the power that I had as a private attorney, I no longer had. And so let me give you a couple examples about why that's important. We've had a number of investigations over the years where we wanted to speak with, for example, an employee with the city of Cleveland. We could not compel that person to testify. And so that delayed our report for over a year until we finally worked out issues. We're also currently dealing with situations where we'd like to investigate those who are not actually contractors, but we want information from them, and we're not able to do that. And so we need to refer out our cases to the county prosecutors, the Ohio Ethics Commission, or others, because they have authority that we don't have. So in terms of the charter amendment, I think it's important that the Agency of Inspector General be added to the charter. I think the draft that has been put together is really very strong. And to the extent that there are details, I concur with the thought that it's more important to put the details via ordinance than to put those into the charter. And I'm happy to answer any questions about either my views of the charter amendment or what my office does or how we can do things better.
Let me just ask this really quickly. Does county council have subpoena power?
They do. And what I'm permitted to do is to go to county council and ask for a subpoena. But what happens with that is several things. First, it enters into the political arena. Secondly, I have to disclose who I want to subpoena, which indicates sort of the direction of the investigation. And then secondly, a council legitimately would ask me, well, why do you want this subpoena power? Because they, in terms of how they exercise their responsibilities, they're not just going to sign or approve a subpoena without understanding why I want that. And so as a result, I have to disclose the theory of my case in addition to the people who I'm looking for, and it puts in an extra layer of delay into the process. So that's why I think it's important.
I have a question.
Ask your indulgence for one moment. I forgot to also thank Councilwoman Baker and Councilwoman Conwell, who have also been tremendously supportive of my agency, and I appreciate that they're here today to participate, and I want to say thank you and recognize their efforts also.
Question, I apologize if I missed this, and it might not be for you, but what's the relevance of this being a separate article versus it going under Article 5?
I think it gives, I think this goes to, I believe, number 2 in Councilman Miller's desire to set it forth in terms of the stature and the importance of ethics in our organization, in our county. And I think also it's appropriate for an independent agency to have its own independent charter provision.
Going back to the question about the subpoena, that county council has the power to
Yes.
subpoena. Do you just approach a couple members and they sign off, or do they have to vote as a body on
Well,
that?
I've been told that they need to vote as a body. And as a result, I've tried to avoid that.
I
Right.
can't imagine why.
Yeah.
Given, I mean, the breadth of what's contained in the proposal, is the language that's currently in place, language pretty much that you agree with?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
You know, there are tweaks that could be made, but it's a strong draft.
Okay. Would you be willing to at least allow us to know, not now, but put on paper what you see as being the tweaks that you would like to see?
Yes, but yes, I'm happy to do that. I would also say this, though, which is, you know, I'm cognizant of the need to be able to put something together that can pass council and is appropriate there. And so, although there are things that I might like to add on, they may not be critical. But yes, I'm happy to make some suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, since it's your job and it's your office, you know, I think that it would be useful for us to at least be aware of the things that you know, you think could be stronger. And you can let us know when you're doing that if you don't mind.
Sure.
If you have trepidations about their inclusion, what your trepidations might be, and I think that would be real instructive for us.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me just address one last overall piece, and that has to do with thoughts about enforcement and the appropriate role of the Inspector General's office. Every Inspector General's office does two things. We investigate and we report and recommend, so the third, but we don't enforce. And that's a way of cabining the authority of my office, which I think is appropriate. We can look at things, we can report things, but the way to make sure that we're not judge, jury, and executioner is to not have the enforcement powers. And so whether it's at the federal level with recent recommendations at that level and investigations into McCabe and that sort of thing, we don't enforce. And I think that's the right thing to do. So, and I know that that is an issue that's come up, but I think that's appropriate. And I know that there are members of council who are concerned of an Inspector General's office that has no curb lane lines on it, and not having enforcement powers, I think is an important way to make my office accountable.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission? Good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Adrian, commission members. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Janine, who's signed up to speak? Janae, that is. Did I say Janine? I'm sorry. Janae. Okay.
We don't have anyone signed up for public input.
Okay. Let's move on to the next order of business then, which is to have some additional conversation about the executive and council succession issues that we've taken up a couple of times. We have, again, been trying to modify what we had in front of us in order to try to see if we can come up with something that would be palatable both to the council and to the voters. And we've had some conversation with the folks over at the Board of Elections. I still would like to have them have an opportunity to come in and talk to us because they've raised some issues, which I've shared with you, that I think that we really need to take under consideration before we make any final decision about what that language should look like. And so I've asked Janae to find another date that we're all available so we can sit down and we can have those discussions. So that's going to be forthcoming, so as Forrest Gump would say, and that's all I have to say about that. Yes.
Judge, if I may, Michael, would you want to elaborate a little bit on your memo so that everybody can get a better understanding as to the message? I've read it and I don't disagree with it, but maybe that goes back to what the judges.
So certainly. So I had a chance, I was invited last Friday to go meet with some of the staff over at the Board of Elections, in particular Brent Lawler and Corey Milne, who work in the nomination and petition department there. And they're very knowledgeable about the election calendar, the election timeline, some of the logistical things that come into play when putting together these types of provisions. And I think they were appreciative of having the opportunity to meet, at least in an informal setting initially, and I know we want to bring them in at some point so that they can speak to the commission as a whole. But they brought to, at least to my attention, a few issues that I know I sent to the commission as a whole yesterday that I think we should be mindful of as we move forward in the area, particularly around if we want to move towards a special election process. And just to summarize a few of those highlights quickly is, one is, if we do a primary and a general, there needs to be sufficient time between those two because they need to be able to, they need probably at least 2 weeks to certify the primary. And then after that, 30 to 45 days at the very least to provide enough time for absentee and vote by mail. Another one is that we need to be mindful of the filing deadlines, including protest deadlines and write-in deadlines, if we have all of those things. Not every special election has protests or write-ins. You just have a set filing deadline, but we need to think about, okay, you've got the date of the vacancy, okay, how much time between that and when you need to file, how much time between when you file and when you hold the primary, et cetera. One of the big things they called to my attention was the costs of holding special elections, which is an important one. They basically indicated that it costs about $2 million. If the county were to hold a special election as a standalone countywide election, it would cost about $2 million to the county. Normally those costs are divided amongst the political subdivisions that are on the ballot in a normal general election. So if we did a special primary election and a special general election where neither of those elections fell on a date when another election was happening, it could cost the county up to $4 million to hold that. So again, that's not necessarily meaning we can't do it, but it's I think something we should take into account when we determine, what's the value of having a special election versus what's the sort of just straight up numerical costs. And then finally, they being mindful of costs, brought up the concept of having primaries and or a runoff election as may be needed. So similar to how the city of Cleveland, I think, currently does it for their general elections, is if one or fewer people file for the primary election, then a primary just simply isn't held. And if one person files, that person moves on to the general election ballot, which means you don't have to hold that election, you get to save some of those costs. Alternatively, one way you can do it is you could have a special general election where anybody could file. You could have multiple names on the ballot. And then you have two options. Either you could have just that open election and whoever receives the plurality of those votes wins, but then you potentially have a winner who gets 25% of the vote, which maybe is distasteful in certain circumstances. So then you could do a runoff election after that, where the top 2 vote getters move on to a runoff if needed, because if somebody got a majority in the first election, then that may not be needed. But they were saying that in four jurisdictions that do that type of election, that runoff election, normally they'll need at least 2 months again between the initial election and the runoff election. So we have to keep that in mind as well. They raised a number of other issues sort of around the margins there. But I'll let them speak to those. These were sort of the major items that we discussed at length. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to do my best, but otherwise we can.
No, I thank you, because I read this, and to be honest with you, I was startled as to see the cost of this. I understand what it costs in our municipality for a special election, but your summary here, I think, was very well put, and I wanted to make sure that there was some discussion in today's minutes about it. Thank you.
No problem.
Any more questions about that? The county executive was kind of late to the party today, but he's asking permission to have opportunity to speak to you about the Inspector General issue. And so unless there's some dissension, I'm going to afford him that opportunity. Hearing none. Okay. Mr. Budish.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
So I'll just make a few comments. First of all, I want to say that I appreciate Councilman Miller's efforts in this amendment, and I appreciate his including me and the administration ahead of time, giving us a chance to participate with him. And I have told him this. I think it's a good job. I have also said that my view is that it's similar to what Mayor Persiak expressed at one of the earlier meetings, not necessarily about this. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I don't think it's broke. I think it's working well now by statute. As a practical matter, it would be impossible, I believe, for a county executive or county council to eliminate or significantly reduce the power of the Inspector General at this point. Just public reaction would be overwhelming. So I don't think as a practical matter that there's any concern there. The primary changes are those that were pointed out by Inspector General Griffin, the paragraphs 7 and 8 dealing with access to documents and subpoena power. I know that the Inspector General has, on occasion, expressed to me some concern more about timeliness of getting documents, and whenever he's expressed that to me, as he said, I have made sure that the documents are made available and as promptly as humanly possible. So we are operating well, I believe, and I think it's great that we have Mr. Griffin as our Inspector General. I think he and his office do a great job, and we appreciate what he does. I mean, it really helps the county. So there's no question that the Office of Inspector General, and in particular the person we have in there right now leading it, is doing a great job. If council were to determine that it was necessary to give subpoena power, I believe council could do it by ordinance, just as they have created the office by ordinance, rather than put it into a charter amendment. Whether it's by ordinance or charter, I do believe that there should be a provision that says that subpoenas are not public records unless and until the investigation is closed, along the lines of a grand jury subpoena, which is the investigative stage of a criminal investigation. Grand jury subpoenas are confidential. The grand jury, the prosecutor cannot make them public. We have seen over the last several months that if they are available, then they will be in the media the next day. And unfortunately, before an investigation is concluded, there's a significant risk that a person's reputation may be destroyed without ultimately having done anything wrong. Once an investigation is closed, then it's a different story. But I think that allowing subpoenas to be public records, and I believe that without something in the record, in the charter or in the ordinance, they would be public records as soon as they're issued. So that would be a strong suggestion I would make. So if everything's working so well, why not put it into the charter? And the answer I would give is that this is only 7.5 years old. And as time goes by, we learn things. I mean, we've been learning things every day about this charter government. And we may find along the way that something is not going well or something is not working. And if it's in the charter, it is very difficult to change. If it's ordinance, council can change it. The example of a potential problem I would give is the state inspector general. The state of Ohio has an inspector general provision, and I can tell you that when I was in the state legislature back in 2009 and 10, there was an inspector general that was appointed by a prior administration that became extremely political and very disruptive and dangerous in my view. And there was nothing particular that could be done at that point because of the terms that are laid out similar to the way this is laid out, where you don't have the ability to remove an inspector general. So I just think putting it into a charter makes it very difficult to change, and we don't yet know how this will be handled. Clearly, there's no political issues here at this point, but who knows what the next issue might be. I also would note, by the way, that the state of Ohio has created its inspector general provision by statute. It is not in the state constitution. So that's all I have to say.
Any questions for the executive? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that input. Okay. I want to bring this to everybody's attention. Time is running out. We have to have a report to council by the 1st of July, which means that we have to get that report together and drafted and vetted and revised. And before we get to the 1st of July, this is the middle of May. It means we don't have a lot of time in order to get this done. So I've already started talking to Janae. We've had some conversation with the law department about the things that are necessary for us to put that train on the track and get it moving. And as we develop pieces, I think we're going to do this kind of ad hoc, give things to them. So for instance, the first item that we took up as related to the two departments of government that were able to find common ground, we've already kind of pushed that over. We had talked about using pretty much the same format as the last commission used. And so unless there's some objection to us doing that, I think that's the direction that we're going to take. If you take a look at the old report, if you see that there's something we need to change, then we can, but otherwise I think we're going to follow that format. And going to continue to have those kind of discussions with the folks in the law department so we can put this together as we get things done. Obviously, we've still got at least 3 pieces that are still outstanding that we have to nail down. And I'm hopeful that we're not going to have, marathon sessions. I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to come to some conclusions about what we want to do with each one of these 3 sections. But we'll just have to see. So I'm having Janae get in touch with everybody to find out what your availability is, so that we can kind of set out on a roadmap of times that we're gonna get together and try to get some things done. And in the interim period, it is my intention to call each of you individually just to kind of see, you know, what your thoughts are on the things that have been raised so far. And so that yeah, I mean, before this is all over, I may think that my name is Henry Kissinger.
That's good.
Yeah, okay. We'll do shuttle diplomacy with everybody in order to try to see if we can work through any outstanding issues that we have. But I think that we're making progress. And as I told Tom McClure earlier today, I have to always remind myself of something that my dad used to tell me with some degree of frequency, and that was that progress is measured in inches, not feet. So we will inch forward. I think, is there other, there being no other public input, we're going to stand adjourned if there is such a motion. Yes?
We have minutes from April 4th.
Ah, yes. Yes, please. Can you make a motion? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Probably moved and seconded. Is there any readiness on the motion? Any readiness on the motion? Readiness on the motion. Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks to those who could get here by telecommunications. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We have
Thank you.
scheduled yet, or we have to do?
Our next meeting that's scheduled on the calendar is June 6th, but I'll send out a doodle poll to try to set up a couple of meetings prior to that. Well, of course, prior to that.
Okay. Good enough. Thank you, everybody. See you next time. Same bad time, same bad channel.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
For them to get a service only one to do the job, which has been wrong. No, the shelter. I was the one making efforts first for county council to go years ago. May 4th, I made a joke. I said, May the 4th, oh now, you know, then I'm not saying anything.
No, I
But you only got one. But based on that particular because legal. But the whole thing,
Okay. All righty.
it was tailored to financial services. You need to have experience to operate the place is never safe, the place is never clean. I became domestic violence victim after the papers came out. And I've been up everywhere, and you call that safe? And their best friends don't take them safe. So that would be an example. We need your absolute acting rather than waiting for us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm.
You know, we pick and choose kind of what we can do proactively. You're right.
Right now, so it's hard for you to reach everyone.
It's a big county.
I heard about this. Oh, others are and last year we remember something to check the record. So this year we want to follow up. However, for a 3-year term contract, they are telling you not remember everything.
Hey, Mayor.
Hey, Dennis, have you raised that issue yet? The one we talked about this afternoon. Yeah, okay, so I was gonna say something, I don't need to.
And I think
It's in process.
yeah, but I think we, from what I.
Yeah, I think so too, by the way.
Okay.
Sorry.